How's it going, guys? And welcome back to BL3's Forgotten, the series where I take a look at underused and not often talked about pieces of gear to determine whether or not they deserve to be remembered within the modern meta of the game or should be left behind and forgotten. And today we are taking a look at the Embrace the Pain and the Pain is Power. If you'd like to get the Pain is Power or the Embrace the Pain for yourself, you're going to want to fast travel over to Devil's Razor on Pandora, specifically taking the Roland's Rest fast travel station. From there, you're going to follow along the cliff face into the encampment where Hawk Carl can spawn, with Hawk Carl being who you can kill to get both the Pain is Power and the Embrace the Pain. Both the Embrace the Pain and the Pain is Power are legendary COV guns. Each are locked to incendiary damage and can roll with 1, 2, or 3 projectiles per shot for 1, 2, or 3 ammo cost per shot. They also share a similar unique effect, where upon beginning to overheat, they will ignite the user. And while ignited by this effect, the weapon will not consume ammo. But along with that, these weapons also gain a buff as they increase with heat. The Embrace the Pain increasing its fire rate, and the Pain is Power increasing its weapon damage. Both these weapons have received 2 changes each, the Embrace the Pain initially getting a 53.8% weapon damage buff, which was later followed up by a 200% weapon damage buff, with the Pain is Power initially getting a 25% weapon damage buff, followed by a 130% weapon damage buff. And yeah, those aren't buffs that you kind of walk away lightly from. These guns definitely have some pretty high base damage, even more so combined with their unique effects. Along with that, these guns both work very well with the Elemental Projector, where unlike the Infernal Wish, which has a unique dot that it applies to itself that isn't actually incendiary damage, these are a proper incendiary dot and therefore trigger the damage buff by the Elemental Projector. Now that being said, we do have a first for this series, because while normally, of course, I like to get footage with all characters on pretty generic builds to sort of give a baseline of what a weapon can do, as much damage as the Embrace the Pain and Pain is Power can do, they are both quite literally unusable at max level unless you are built to tank unbelievably large fire dots. I did attempt to retool some of my usual builds to be able to do that, and yeah, it didn't go so well. So all of the footage in this video is going to be recorded on a build that was sent to me from Z from my Discord server, which is a Moze build with a massive shield that is built to be able to survive these dots, having max survivability as a focus. That being said, damage isn't as much of a focus, but you'll see that these guns do still perform pretty well. Starting off here with the Embrace the Pain and comparing each projectile count, I actually think ×1 felt the worst. Not bad by any means, but the higher counts increase the amount of heat gained per shot. Gaining heat is very important. It's how you get the most out of each of their unique effects. So you want this gun to be gaining heat and you want it overheating, but you also want to be able to manage it within that heat zone to keep yourself on fire as often as possible. ×2 is much better in this aspect, and I think is easily the best balance between damage output and that heat management. ×3 obviously does more damage, but it really didn't feel like it was all that much more, and it came at the cost of the weapon breaking far more often, and therefore dropping out of its heat quicker, despite being the quickest to get you all the way to max. ×2 is definitely the winner here. The Embrace the Pain performed incredibly well on True Molly 1 Takedown, and very serviceably on True Guardian Takedown. It did noticeably fall off on True Guardian Takedown, but it was still super solid. The biggest issue of it was just that it required upkeep of the fire to be pumping out the really good damage, which became harder when I had to fire at health bars for longer, giving less time for me to avoid fully breaking the gun. The Embrace the Pain overall is of course much more suited to characters that make better use out of fire rate than Moze does. In the brief amount of time I was able to use this gun on Zane, it completely shreds. That being said, while underperforming on this build, it's still a pretty damn good AR that dishes out some very solid damage. But is it good enough damage to justify the amount of effort required to get this setup going? I think I'll save that for the final wrap up on both of these. Moving on to the Pain is Power, very similarly to the Embrace the Pain, you want a balance between quickly heating up and being able to manage that heat and damage. And once again, the ×1 is kind of mid for this. It's an alright all-around choice, but does still lack a bit in the actual damage department. And while managing heat is the easiest here, actually getting up into the self-ignition can take some time. ×2 I still think is the absolute best. Quick to combust, still easy enough to manage the heat on, although it will be breaking more often, and much better damage. ×3 here though is actually way better than it was for the Embrace the Pain. Likely this is due to just not having the increased fire rate with heat, letting heat management still be pretty reasonable. Damage felt amazing, and it was still more than usable. I do think the ×2 is still the best all around, but ×3 is for sure a great higher damage option. And once again, the Pain is Power was able to keep up even better than the Embrace the Pain, at least on this build, through all content in the game, feeling damn good on True Guardian. Guardian takedown. Overall, the Embrace the Pain and the Pain is Power are both very interesting guns. They're also both incredibly strong guns. I mean, again, as I mentioned, they both got some pretty big damage buffs, and just looking at their item card, it's kind of ridiculous, especially when taking into account the elemental projector synergy alongside each of their unique effects. The problem is the dot damage is also incredibly high during the endgame, and while surviving these guns is actually a lot more manageable during a playthrough, at Mayhem 10 it becomes a very big struggle, and as I mentioned, I couldn't even really record footage on other characters unless I went through and made entirely new builds for each of them, and even then, I'm not sure anyone has even remotely close to the same potential that Mose does for keeping herself alive with these guns. It requires a lot of effort to use these, and using them does reward you with a very strong COV AR, but it's absolutely not worth the effort when you have so many other COV ARs, pretty much all of which are really damn good, and not a single one of which requires even remotely the same amount of effort to use than the Pain is Power and Embrace the Pain. These are great guns, they're fun to play around with, but they just are not worth the amount of effort required. And really, all they need is to have those dot effects toned down significantly. But that's gonna about do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube and also over on my Twitch channel, where there'll be a link to down in the description below. And just under that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.